Title today is The Epidemic Rise of Autoimmune Disease. I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford, certified functional medicine practitioner and chiropractor.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractor.
And indeed, it has been an explosion. I know when I first got into this and when I became aware that I had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which was an autoimmune problem, I think that the Center for Disease Controls had autoimmunity at like 25 million people in this country, which still is no small number, by the way. But at that time, there wasn't really like an alarm bell ringing. And my mentor, Dr. Ditis Karazian, took him a while to convince me that I had, even though I had Hashimoto's as a diagnosis, that ultimately he said, this is the cause of hypothyroidism, meaning there's autoimmunity everywhere because so many people have hypothyroid. Turns out that that was a correct prediction, which I could not embrace after he told me that for about 2 years. And at that time, people were still not talking about autoimmunity other than MS, rheumatoid arthritis. People hadn't really, even celiac was very seldom diagnosed 10 years ago. Oh, yeah. It wasn't really something that was thought to be a very big entity. And now there's some suggestions it might be as much as 6% of the population. I think the Center for Disease Control came out and said, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was that half of either population or the adult population is going to have some sort of chronic pain within by 2020. Mm-hmm. And our observations are that chronic pain has exploded. Right now, they're saying that it's 130 million.
That's the statistic I heard.
130 million adults have it. That's what, 40% of the population in the United States. And they're saying it's going to increase to half within 2 to 3 years now. The gut is now being acknowledged as being kind of the fomenting area of autoimmunity. We're now starting to see data on lupus, Sjogren's, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and I'm not familiar if there's more than that going on, but I think you're going to find out today whether there is or not. So for years, you've heard us emphasize the gut, and share our observations with you, and say that clinical understandings tend to precede research. In fact, maybe they drive research. Maybe you write papers, we've written papers, we do this online. My mentor has been talking about it since 2002. So it is from 25 million to half of the population from 2002 until 2020, I think would be qualified as an explosion. And it's scary. It's scary. I think we're going to do a few presentations on this. I think maybe we'll talk about eventually the fact that it seems to be being passed on from generation to generation in a variety of different ways. And people always ask me, is it genetic? Hashimoto's is a unique perspective that I'm aware of relative to the statistics of a person getting an immune attack against her thyroid, particularly a woman, and then the chances of their offspring having it and how much it was running in the family, something we had noticed 10 years ago or more in our history. So this should be interesting. I think this is scary, frankly. I think it's an explosion. I don't think that the current standard in place model of healthcare in this country is yet come to terms with it in the sense of what to do about it, in a sense of being able to stop it and control it and things of that nature. And I think the period of time between the time that that's acknowledged and maybe embraced and even brought into the medical model, which I don't know if that will even ever happen. But if it does, every year, more people get sick, and more people have solutions. A lot of the approaches out there, even in the field of functional medicine, forgive me, but even in the field of functional medicine, a lot of it's been watered down. A lot of it's been simplified so that more people can have it open to them in the ostensible argument of, well, more of the people that are in functional medicine, the more we'll get better. Except I've been in functional medicine now, officially practicing it for 10 years, and we've gone from 25 million to well, it's going to be 160 million. Yeah. So the answer can be in there, but the answer is more complex than that. I'm not sure if that's something we're going to get to today in this presentation, but that's kind of the lay of the land as I see it. This is the person I see come into me every day, and we do chronic pain. Little did we know that pretty much everybody that walked in this office was going to have chronic issues that were going to involve autoimmunity and chronic stress responses. That this is our patient population. This is what we do every day. So we're sharing with you what we see. Dr. Gates stays up on all the research. We're able to compare what we see to the research, and that's kind of where we're at. To me, it's concerning. It's scary. The things that I think are happening, I don't even want to say out loud, because it's almost like, wow, where's this going?
Great point. Maybe the take-home point that will really affect people is, think of your kids. Think of your kids and what type of future you want them to have. Everybody wants their kids to have a great future, right? Well, we're seeing kids all the time, and the data is showing this. When you look at the actual trends, as people become adults, their chances of developing these autoimmune diseases is substantial. And so to touch on what you mentioned, just connections between autoimmune disease and the gastrointestinal tract, that's where most of the information is. Why? Because 70% of the immune system is in your gastrointestinal tract. Because as humans have gone along through time, whether you believe in evolution or not, we're not picking a side, that basically you eat something, that's where you're most likely to die. Either you're going to drink bad water, or you're going to eat something that's rotten or not cooked well enough that has bacteria in it. So that's why you have so much of your immune system in the gut. And due to whatever reason it is, whether it is the stress that the American population is under, whether it's the massive loads of antibiotics we take and have taken now for the last 70 years as a society, whether it's that we're too clean and we're not exposed to parasites, whether it's vaccines, we don't know. We're not saying particularly whether it's the food supply. Something seems to be changing in the gut, the microbiome, the bacteria that make up your gastrointestinal tract of Americans, that's leading to this explosion in autoimmune disease. Why do we say that? Because all the research is going back and focusing there, because the researchers are saying, well, what's different? What's going on? And it seems like this is the central focus. And so Dr. Rutherford mentioned that, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's, these are autoimmune diseases, MS. Yes, all very, very strong associations to the gut. In fact, today we attached an article where they looked at a group of Sjogren's patients, and they found that Sjogren's is a condition where people have really dry eyes, really dry mouth. It can be associated with lupus or lupus-like symptoms. And they found tremendous differentiations in their bacteria versus people who don't have Sjogren's. It's not really a surprise when I told Dr. Rutherford. Yeah, exactly. But this is all stuff that we know, but it's just starting to get out there. Why do we say we know it? Because I won't even go into it, because we've done broadcasts on each one of these conditions before. It's just in summary, rheumatoid arthritis, they found bacteria from the gut in the joints of rheumatoid arthritis patients, and they found that the DNA and these bacteria specifically cause the rheumatoid arthritis disease process. They've seen the same thing with mouth bacteria with rheumatoid arthritis
I think I
patients.
can answer that diplomatically without sounding like, if anybody's watched this, if this is your first time, we'll probably have close to 600 hours online now. In the beginning, we used to hear, all you guys talk is about the gut. All you guys talk about is the gut. You think everything's in the gut. You think everything's autoimmune. Well, because we understood, thanks to colleagues of ours and thanks to our own attentiveness to what we were doing, that the gut was a big deal, because you would work with somebody's intestines, and we didn't necessarily get how big it was. We were doing other things first, and this and that and the other thing. And then one day I turned to Dr. Gates and said, when do our patients get really, really better? He goes, well, we fixed the gut. And all of a sudden you fix somebody, the gut, somebody who has like severe rheumatoid arthritis, and it's red, and all of a sudden it's not. I mean, the joints are still bad, but the pain goes away. Or all of a sudden, a Sjogren's patient, you're working with the gut. This is before any of this happened. All of a sudden, their eyes were better, or their mouth was better. You worked with an MS patient, and they were struggling. And by the time we got done with their gut, this is not everybody. Don't get me wrong, okay? But all of a sudden, they're walking away with a cane from doing their gut. And so, that was sporadic because we didn't understand that there were other issues relative to the gut. But that's how we, that's what we do.
And we've evaluated thousands of
patients. And so all we do here is share with you what our observations are relative to what the research says. That's basically what we do. So that's what we saw. That's how we know. That's why we feel confident about sharing the data with you at the point at which we share it with you. So
completely. Yeah, and the associations, for example, with MS are just getting stronger and stronger. I think I mentioned, I read an article this morning, it's attached, where they're now saying it's the gut for MS patients. We know certain things. We know that if you take autoreactive T cells from an MS mouse, for example, so basically immune cells that are abnormal in an MS mouse, and you put it into a mouse who doesn't have MS, their gut breaks down in 7 days, their blood-brain barrier breaks down in 4 days, and then they get MS. So there's a huge association between this barrier and your blood-brain barrier and MS. And then type 1 diabetes, the research is out on that. And then the infamous Hashimoto's, that's really where Dr. Krasnian blew the doors off on this, and the data is there associating gluten problems with Hashimoto's. Now we see other food problems, dairy issues with Hashimoto's, and it goes deeper than that because we work with, 80% of our practice seems to have Hashimoto's because it ties in with so many other conditions. And so we see a lot of other food intolerances associated with Hashimoto's. But you also mentioned genetics. And so that's one curious thing because, genetics are genetics. Genetics haven't really changed in our population from 1900 to 2017, going on 2018. What's going on? And the genome-wide association studies on autoimmune disease are basically finding that a lot of the genes for autoimmune disease overlap. So everybody likes to think, oh, it's one gene for celiac disease, it's one gene for rheumatoid arthritis. Yes, there are genes that have greater importance. We're finding that there's this great overlap, and they're not entirely certain why somebody develops, like if your mom has Hashimoto's, why do you get rheumatoid arthritis? Or if your mom has Hashimoto's, why do you get celiac disease? Your mom had lupus, why do you have celiac? They don't completely understand that, but it's thought to be a mix between your genetics, meaning you're predisposed, because of
you're a compromised host.
You're a compromised host, and they're finding that a lot of these genetics deal with immune chemical recognition. So you have an immune system with millions of checks and balances to make sure your immune system never attacks you, and it only attacks bacteria, viruses, parasites, things like that. Well, some people genetically are a little weak, where they're more likely for their immune system to turn on them. And so that's what we're finding, and it may manifest again as celiac, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, something of that nature. But there's the environmental factor that has to be paid attention to. And the biggest environmental factor that they're seeing is your gut, your bacteria, your intestinal barrier lining, how viruses interact with your bacteria and your gut lining, and then how foods interact with the gut lining. Bottom line, the American food supply has changed a little bit. We can say that conservatively on this broadcast.
Yeah, without getting into the controversies
of it. But the food supply has changed. And so is that part of it? Perhaps. We definitely see that people are not tolerating certain foods as well as maybe they used to. At least the data is coming out on that. And so all these things have to be taken into account as to why someone's physiology becomes so disturbed that their immune system starts attacking them, which again is never supposed to happen.
To me, it comes down to being a compromised host. And when I say it's scary, this is what I mean. You come out, you're a baby, maybe you have a mom that has autoimmunity. Like for example, what Dr. Gates says, I have a mom and an aunt who had a thyroid's taken out. My grandmother had a goiter. My uncle had multiple sclerosis. My other uncle had Parkinson's disease. So I had these genetic propensities to be able to develop an autoimmune problem, but I didn't have to develop an autoimmune problem. And then the things that we see that you already mentioned, to me, the person who develops it is already a compromised host from the perspective that it looks like they either have had, we're not picking on antibiotics, but antibiotics kind of screw up the bacterial flora in your gut. And when you, in my age, I'm 65, I mean, everybody got antibiotics. Penicillin. Who isn't allergic who's 65 to penicillin from taking so much penicillin? I am. I'm allergic to it. Okay. And so that wipes out your gut. And I in my mind, now Dr. Gates is a functional neurologist, but I do all the intakes. I really get a lot of time to think about these things and observe them and see. I mean, to me, it's the brain. But to me, but the antibiotics are a big one. I think if it's not brain, if you get a kid who's like 3 or 4 or 5 years old, has got a gut problem, they either in chronic stress or they've had a lot of antibiotics that have screwed their gut up. I think that those are the ones that start it. And then these other issues become an issue as far as the toxins and the Roundup Ready and stuff like that. At least that's how it feels to me. Now, I'm not saying this is 100%. This is just what I see every day and taking histories from the time these people are born until the time. Surgeries, I guess you could have a surgery when you're like 5 weeks old, which I had, that could cause a permanent leaky gut. So basically you have this person who's been set up and then maybe they undergo a big stress, they go under big pneumonia, they get in a car accident, they have a surgery, they have a baby. All these things shift immune responses. A hysterectomy. Yeah. And then all of a sudden that immune system, which was holding its own and you weren't getting the autoimmunity, boom. Next thing you know, you go, man, I got in a car accident. And since then, my whole life has fallen apart. That baby, next thing you know, my whole life has fallen apart. I had a surgery on my hip, and the next thing you know, I have sharp shooting pain and tenderness and all throughout my body, especially in my feet. And yet, the surgeon said it has nothing to do with the history. We set off a trigger that has set off an unexpressed immune gene in your body because you were probably a compromised host already, either having already had a digestive problem or stress response that didn't raise to the level of autoimmunity, but now, boom, now you've kind of exceeded that threshold. And now you get attacked, and now you've got it. At least that's what I see in listening. That's what I hear in listening to people's histories every day. Because I ask them, look, start at like ground zero. Like, was your mother stressed when you were in the womb? Oh yeah, my mother went through a divorce and somebody stuck a gun to her head. It's like, oh my God, because the kid tells me that it started when they were 3 years old and they had a bad gut and they were 3 years old and they couldn't find anything. That's a chronic stress response. So I think that's kind of like the cliff notes of what feels like it's happening to me. Now, I'm not saying that's perfect. I'm just saying that that's kind of like, it'll be filled in by the research and by the results.
We're going to do a series of this. So we'll go deeper and deeper today. We're just kind of setting the introduction. Yeah. But yeah, we have a rheumatoid arthritis patient right now. We worked with a lot of RA patients. The biggest factor for this individual is stress. When that individual is under stress, the RA flares. Why? How could you explain that? Well, when you're under stress, you secrete tons of stress hormones, cortisol. Many of you have heard of that from your adrenal glands, and cortisol damages bodily tissue. It breaks down bodily tissue. Why? Because you're trying to mobilize glucose so that you can run as fast as you can. But when it's chronically elevated, then it's breaking down bodily tissue, namely the gastrointestinal tract. Pieces of bacteria come in, inflame the RA process. And yeah, just to go further, so that they can really understand, how does a surgery relate to an autoimmune disease coming on? Well, you need to realize, even though you're under anesthesia, so your brain doesn't feel the pain, 75% of the pain fibers in your body actually end up in your brainstem, where it's not even consciously realized. And in this part of your brainstem is where a lot of your fight-flight responses emanate from. And they've shown that cortisol responses can go up 7 times when your
body still thinks it's being
stabbed.
It thinks it's being attacked just because you're under anesthesia in a controlled environment. The body doesn't go, oh, okay, that's fine. You can now cut me off.
Yeah, exactly. You can slice through my abdomen to get to whatever's in there. I mean, it's who's not had surgery, and it's extremely painful. When you come out of it, that's because they're slicing through your tissue.
So you can see the confusion, because who hasn't had surgery, who isn't taking antibiotics, who hasn't been stressed. This is just tip of the iceberg. We can get into prescription drugs and non-prescription drugs, and on and on and on.
Yeah, and then we have an inflammation. So let's just say you don't have autoimmune disease, which we haven't even talked about statistics. Inflammation. Yeah. Oh, gosh. And so, some statistics said 1 out of 6 Americans have autoimmune disease, which was alarming. That's like 50 million Americans. But now there are studies coming out that say 1 out of 3 females have Hashimoto's, because they're changing the criteria down, not to sell more medications, to say, no, actually, this is significant. When you have immune cells to your thyroid, irregardless of your thyroid hormones, so we don't care if you're on thyroid medication or not. We care, but you know what I mean. But the immune attack on your thyroid creates a host of health problems, between going in and damaging your brain, affecting blood flow in your brain, being associated with depression, other associations with polycystic ovarian syndrome, Meniere's disease. It goes on, migraines. It goes on and on and on and on.
Gastritis.
Yeah. And so you look at all that, and then you just shake your head and say, we have a major problem here. And then going back to the inflammation. So let's just say you don't have autoimmune disease, then your chances of having prediabetes, obesity, being overweight are drastically higher. And you know what all the data on that says? It's a gut bacterial problem. Because we eat such a high saturated fat, high carbohydrate diet in this country that it tends to grow these obesogenic inflammatory bacteria, then where pieces of them break off going into the bloodstream, creating inflammation, creating insulin resistance. And maybe you're lucky enough not to develop an autoimmune disease, but you're still inflamed. And that's why it breaks my heart sometimes to walk through the mall, because you see our country and what people are eating, and yeah, it smells delicious. I love smelling Cinnabon when I walk into the mall.
You go past the food court.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, it's like
seat,
my hand starts to shake because it smells so good. But you see what it's doing to our country by the same token. So, and it's not just food. Like Dr. Rutherford said, I think it's really more the stress component too. Is probably the biggest factor. That's the biggest factor.
That's what we see. When we interview, everybody cognites. Yes, I'm in chronic fight flight. Yes, I'm stressed all the time. Yes, my mind will not stop. Yes, I can't go to sleep. I wake up, I can't. That's our patient population. We didn't know that's who was going to come walking in here. That's who comes walking in here. The person who doesn't come walking in here like that, I almost want to say, well, what are you doing here? Go home and change your diet or something like that, you know, because it's that significant.
So that's it. That's what we have for today.
Scary stuff. We're going to do a series on this. We're going to get into each of these areas much more definitively, try to tease it out for you the way that we had to tease it out for us, and see what you think. I think it'll be helpful. If you've got an autoimmune problem, you should watch this series. You're probably going to hear as comprehensive a presentation on this as there is, because this is something we've been doing pretty successfully for a long time. Successfully meaning figuring out how to get people's immune systems back in balance, dampening them, getting them under control, giving people the tools to do it in a properly selected patient. There are some people who maybe, or maybe a little too, have too much, have had too much damage from the vicious cycles that can be involved in autoimmunity. They might not get that type of a result, but the vast majority of you can get a decent result if you but first you have to kind of get an idea of what's going on and where to go and how to go about it. And it's more than the autoimmune paleo diet, which is fine, but it's way more than that. And so this is something I think that Dr. Gates and I will give you a lot of clarity on over the next couple of presentations.
Yes, we will. Yeah. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.